In 2002, director Peter Jackson gave the world an epic second installment of what would become one of the most famous movie trilogies of all time.
In 2021, we try 4 bourbons from one of our favorite non-distilling producers.
The film is Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers.
The whiskey is Penelope Bourbon.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we're kicking off season 4, Brad.
Dude, this is the 4th time that we've decided, you know what? We're going to keep doing this.
We have reevaluated it that many times and we're still doing it, folks.
Yeah, man, we're here. This is like 2 years in to the podcast. Yeah. We started 2 years ago with Goodfellas, barely made it through, but here we are like, I don't know, 300-400 episodes later, and we're still going strong.
It certainly feels like 400 episodes, man. Man, I'm so excited to be back though, Brad. You know, we're kicking off season 4, which is going to be our biggest and best season yet. If you haven't had a chance to go back and listen to last week's bonus episode, you know, we broke down what the season's going to look like. We revealed the whole slate of movies, all the guest hosts we're going to be having. But we decided to save today just for us because we're talking about, I think, one of both of our favorite movies ever, The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers.
Yeah, Bob, this, like, I was so pumped when we watched The Fellowship. I gave that a 10 out of 10 because I love that movie. But The Two Towers is... It's just so good, dude.
It's a step up in every way, though, too. Like, that's the thing is you gave it a 10 out of 10, and I know that you like this one even better than that. You know that I like this one even better than that. So, like, I mean, this might be one of those times, Brad, where we just both give a movie a 10 out of 10 right out of the gate and have nothing more to say.
We might turn it up to 11 by the end. Who knows?
I think we might. Hey, but before we get into that, we want to invite you guys, if this is your first time listening, or if you've been kind of along for the ride for us for a while but haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. Please give us a 5-star review. It really helps boost us in the search results of all of your favorite platforms. We'd love to get some more people on board for the Film and Whiskey Podcast. And on top of that, Brad, each episode, we're going to be asking a question to our followers on social media. And I guess I'll just go ahead and pull the trigger on today's question. Here's the question I want to hear answered on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Where does this movie rank among second installments in a trilogy?
Oh, wow.
Is this the best part 2 ever? Because it's got some stiff competition, Brad, but I really think this one kind of holds its own.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like what happens with a lot of trilogies is that the first movie starts off with like some unique world or premise or just, you know, really cool character. And the second and third movie kind of peter off because the newness has worn off. Mm-hmm. And The Lord of the Rings just ups the ante in every way. It takes you on these 3 different journeys that kind of parallel one another and set each other in different lights. And all together, it weaves this fascinating narrative that gets much bigger than the first movie. And somehow it pulls it all off. I don't think I can imagine many movies better than this in a trilogy, as far as second movies go.
Yeah, I mean, like, for me, it's basically a 3-way tie, or the argument is, I guess, between this, Godfather 2, and Empire. Like, just in terms of what the function of each one is in the scope of that trilogy, I can't think of maybe Toy Story 2, but that they made a 4th one, so that's not a trilogy anymore. So yeah, I guess it's really just those 3 for me that would be competing for that title.
Yeah, I have not seen Godfather 2. I know you were very excited that I have seen Godfather, and I feel proud of myself for that. But at some point, we'll have to hit up Godfather 2 on the podcast because I know it's something worth watching.
Well, Brad, one of the great joys of my life is introducing you to some of these movies. And usually what that means is that we move into a segment that we have called Brad Explains, where Brad breaks down the plot of the movie that he has just seen, often for the first time. You know, when we get around to Godfather 2, you will be coming in cold and you will give us your first-time thoughts. But Brad, you've seen this movie, The Two Towers, many, many times. And I have a feeling that you can hit us with a really good, really condensed Brad Explains We're trying something different this season. We're going to put Brad on a timer because with some of these movies that we've done, it is like impossible to explain them in less than 5 minutes. But hey, we have a show to do. We got to get this show on the road. So Brad, what we're going to start doing this season is putting you on a 60-second timer for Brad Explains, and you're going to have a hard cutoff after 60 seconds. So what do you think, man? Do you think you can do this in 60 seconds?
Bob, I refuse to do this in 60 seconds. I think I will do it in 40 seconds.
All right, Brad, I'm going to put 1 minute on the timer. Can you break down the plot of the movie, The Two Towers?
I sure can, Bob. The Two Towers is a movie that follows the broken Fellowship of the Ring. We follow Frodo and Sam as they are guided by a new, tenuous ally named Gollum, who desperately wants the ring. He takes them closer and closer to Mordor. It also follows Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli as they chase down the two other hobbits, Merry and Pippin, who had been taken by the Uruk-hai off to Saruman. As they search for the hobbits, they are sidetracked by Gandalf, who sends them off to Edoras to help the nation of Rohan fight off the new army of Sauron that is going to destroy the nation of men. And the third path that we follow is that of Merry and Pippin, who go to Fangorn Forest.
10 seconds.
They find new allies in Treebeard, and who helps destroy Saruman's base of action, which is Isengard.
Boom. All done. That was exactly 60 seconds, Brad.
Dude, I'm nailing it, man. I told you.
I gotta say, man, if you are not a Lord of the Rings follower or fan, that was so many names and so many places. That was literally just like, you just gave a list of proper nouns for 1 minute.
Yep.
With like no other words involved.
Aragorn, Uruk-hai, Gollum.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, the premise of this movie is we are following, at the end of the first film, the Fellowship of the Ring, these 9 individuals who had banded together have been scattered. And we're following like the 3 main threads of the alliances from within that 9 people across their journeys again. It culminates in a gigantic battle scene at the end of the movie where this nation of Rohan is assisted by some elvish warriors. It's, in my opinion, Brad, the best battle sequence ever committed to film. I don't know that I've ever seen one better than that.
I don't know, man. The Last Jedi really had a great battle sequence on a weird red salt planet.
That was pretty cool.
That was
really
pretty cool,
neat.
Brad.
Hey, you know what? We're not talking about Star Wars this season. I get a full season off from hearing anything about Star Wars. Don't you start.
That's actually super sad to me. we need to get into the prequels.
No, we don't. All right, Brad. So where do you want to start talking about this film, The Two Towers? I mean, we could start with, the director, Peter Jackson. I do feel like just looking at this movie, it has a very different look and feel from the first one did. We could jump right into performances. I mean, what are you thinking? Where should we just broach this thing from?
I think starting with the story elements of this movie and looking at how Peter Jackson interweaves the massive epic tale of Lord of the Rings that only gets bigger and bigger. Like Tolkien started off with 9 characters that you follow in the Fellowship. Really, he started with 4 at the start, the 4 hobbits. Then he adds on an extra 5. You got 9 people to follow. And then he's like, you know what I want to do? I'd like to make my life more difficult. I'm going to split them all up into 3 different groups, and we're going to follow all 3 of them, and it's going to be wild. And the fact that Peter Jackson can keep that story together is amazing to me.
Yeah, and you specifically talked about the story itself, and that leads me to think about the script, the writing. I feel like this had the most kind of monumental task of all 3 films, because you're taking these 3 completely different threads now. You're not following one main story. And with each thread, you're introducing more and more characters into this whole tapestry that is Lord of the Rings. And from what I understand, Brad, I'll make a confession. I've never read the full Lord of the Rings books, like all 3 of them. But my understanding, just from being a nerd and watching so many special features on the DVDs and stuff, is that they kind of had to manipulate the timeline a little bit for The Two Towers, more than with any other movie. Because apparently, like, some of the events that happen in the 3rd Lord of the Rings movie were actually happening in the Two Towers book. But in order to kind of build to the crescendo of this giant battle sequence at the end of this movie, they kind of had to streamline some stuff and push some things off for the third movie. And honestly, Brad, I think that they did about as perfect of a job as they could structuring this story. There aren't too many threads to follow where you're not, where you just don't care about some after a while. I think they do a really good job of giving stakes to all three of the main threads of this movie. And they don't pull too much attention away from the main story, which is, Frodo trying to get this ring to Mount Doom to destroy it.
Yeah, I think one of the big things for me is, as somebody who's read the books probably maybe 4 or 5 times, it's probably been a solid 7 or 8 years since I've read them. But from what I remember, really the only story that might mismatch a little bit of the timing would be Frodo and Sam's. Mm-hmm. I think that Peter Jackson takes them into the third book in this second movie. But other than that, I think that Jackson does a great job of pulling all the different narrative strands from the books together into, like you said, a cohesive, understandable story. What usually happens when you get a book like this that's transformed into a movie, you have a lot of people who go, well, the books, they added these things or they took away from the books. And I think that the only part that frustrates me about this movie is the fact that Liv Tyler is in it.
Oh, interesting.
I don't like her as an actress very much.
Huh.
I think that her wispy voice is only good as an elf.
Okay.
But there's no such thing as Arwen in the books, in like the second book or really the third book till almost the very end.
Oh, I did not know that.
So,
okay.
Yeah, that is probably the only like change from the book to the movie that drives me nuts a little bit, because in the end, and I get that you're supposed to have this romance and they're trying to play off Aragorn and Éowyn versus Aragorn and Arwen. Not that would ever get confusing or anything. And I get a little bit annoyed at the Aragorn-Arwen romance that gets played in this movie because it just feels like it adds runtime.
It does.
And it feels unnecessary. Like, there's probably a solid 15 to 20 minutes of Aragorn and Arwen, and it could have been maybe one scene that was 2 or 3 minutes long, and I would have been fine with that.
So, all right, maybe the best way to go forward then is let's kind of talk about each one of these 3 story threads. The Frodo and Sam and Gollum thread, the Aragorn and all his mates thread, and then the Merry and Pippin thread. But since
all his mates,
there's
literally 2 of them. It's an elf called Legolas and a Gimli named and a dwarf named Gimli.
Since we have already started talking about that one, let's jump there first. So we are introduced to those characters kind of running across the countryside, chasing down this band of Uruk-hai, who are like these, mutant orc things that have captured Merry and Pippin. They're trying to get them back. They eventually run into this kind of wandering band of soldiers from the nation of Rohan, which has fallen into disrepair because its king is basically being possessed by the evil wizard Saruman. And a bunch of intrigue happens. They get into some big battles. Aragorn falls off the side of a cliff, and they think he's dead for a while, but of course he's not, because he's basically the second hero of these movies. He comes back to help them fight this giant battle called the Battle of the Hornburg at Helm's Deep.
What is your name?
Hallis, son of Hammer, my lord. The men are saying that we will not live out the night. They say that it is hopeless.
This is a good sword. Halith, son of Hammer. There is always hope.
And they give him basically 2 love interests in this movie, because they're just jam-packing this thing to have the attractive male action lead have women falling all over him. So back in Rivendell, where the elves are from, he has his soulmate named Arwen. There's a whole big thing about how the age of the elves is coming to an end, and they have to go away to some undying lands where they basically leave this realm. And she has to decide, is she going to stay behind and be with Aragorn, or is she going to go to the undying lands? At the same,
yeah, Bob, that's actually called Valinor. Just so you know.
Thank you, sir. And then at the same time, they have this maiden of Rohan named Éowyn, who falls hard for Aragorn. And you think,
Dude,
you know,
who wouldn't fall hard?
I mean,
for
I
Aragorn?
fell hard for Aragorn just watching this movie. Let's be honest here. Like, and so there's a will they, won't they thing. The movie kind of misleads you into thinking that Arwen has gone off into the Undying Lands. And so the last thing you really see in this movie is Aragorn reuniting with this maiden of Rohan, Éowyn. And it does kind of leave you on a cliffhanger as far as their relationship is concerned. I think you're right, Brad. There's a little too much put on the Arwen and Aragorn relationship here. And there's this really extended sequence right in the middle of the movie where Aragorn's having a flashback, and it ends up being like 3 flashbacks in a row.
Yep.
And every time you think, okay, I understand the story, I understand she has to go to the Undying Lands, they're like, no, let me remind you one more time what's happening here. And they go back for another 5 minutes, and you watch Arwen arguing with her dad. And like, it really does kind of grind the movie to a halt, Brad. I love this movie, but if there is one big knock I have against it, it's that the middle, you know, I'd say 40 minutes to an hour kind of drags.
It really does. And I would agree with you. It's because of that extended Arwen sequence, which is kind of why I come back to, I already don't care for Liv Tyler. I think her best role she's ever played in is as Arwen. So like, I like her role in these movies. I think it just needed to be left on the cutting room floor. Some of her scenes. I think if you kept anything, it should have been the 1 or 2 scenes where they show her giving the Even Star, the jewel, to Aragorn and saying, hey, like, this is yours. Like, I think that could have done it. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of conflicted with it because in some ways I really respect that they actually explained something for a change. Because, like, you know, in the Fellowship of the Ring episode we did, one of my big complaints was I don't like it when movies like remind you that there is a lore behind everything, but then they never explain it. It's like just adding unnecessary names and stuff for no reason. So like, you know, when you have Gandalf battling the Balrog or whatever, and he's like shouting all these titles at it. He's like, you flame of Udun. I'm like, what's that mean? What's the flame of Udun? I don't know what that is. And they never explain it.
Come on, dude. It's Ian McKellen shouting compelling, random fantasy nonsense, and it's awesome.
It is awesome. But what I'm saying is, I think that I get kind of frustrated sometimes that these movies never actually go into these random names they bring up. And for once, they finally do say, no, we need some background here. We need to remind you who Arwen is and what's at stake. So I do appreciate that. And I also had the opposite experience you did with Liv Tyler. Like, I really thought she was fantastic in this movie for being someone who all she was handed on the page was like, be sad. I thought that she did a really good job of providing some emotional weight to those scenes. And I'm with you. Like, I understand that, you know, of all the actors in this movie, she may be just talent-wise one of the weaker ones, but I thought she did a really good job with what she was given here.
Well, and as we're talking about the script and the characters in this section, I think that one of the reasons I struggle with Arwen is because I like Miranda Otto as Éowyn so much. And I love that the way the script is written for how Aragorn interacts with Éowyn. Like, there's so many opportunities for him to belittle her or put her in her quote-unquote place and say, no, and like, kind of like Theoden does. Like, Theoden is kind of respectful to her, but he's like, no, like, you need to lead the women and the children to Helm's Deep. No, you can't fight. And you'll see that continue in the next movie. And Aragorn continually offers her respect and honor while he doesn't necessarily, like, contradict what, you know, her king is telling her to do.
Yeah.
And I think that that's probably my favorite aspect of Éowyn and Aragorn's relationship is that, you know, he doesn't necessarily lead her on. She obviously falls for him really hard, but she falls for him because he shows her respect. And I think that that's huge. And I wish that more romances in movies were scripted that way.
And just to wrap up, you know, talking about this thread, because it does go through the whole movie, final thoughts, I guess, on Aragorn, on Gandalf and Theoden and all the people that kind of run through this thread of the movie. Do you have anything, you know, real quick notes that you want to share on those?
Well, first off, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli ran 135 miles in 3 days. And if that's not like ultra marathoner status, I don't know what is.
Right.
Dudes are crazy.
Where did you get that data, Brad?
I mean, when you when you really commit to a fantasy world, you just pick up tidbits of information.
I was going to say, this is coming from the guy who can't be bothered to learn the name of the director for half the movies that we record podcasts on. And then we do Lord of the Rings and you're like 135 miles in 3 days.
I've never once asked you the name of the director as we're starting the episode. I don't know what you're talking about.
Denis Villeneuve.
Denis Villeneuve. No, I will say, before we move on from the Rohan segment, I think Éomer is one of the best characters.
Oh, he's awesome.
Best acting. Like, he is so cool. And when him and Gandalf come down the hill to save the day at Helm's Deep.
Dude.
I mean, if there's a spiritual moment in anyone's life.
I feel the Holy Ghost.
Like, that is it.
It is, legitimately, it is a chill-inducing scene. And the way that it's shot, the way that it's color-graded, the way that they have diffused that beautiful dawn light into everything.
Yep, Howard Shore.
It's such a powerful moment. And, Brad and I, both being pastors, that's a sermon illustration waiting to happen. That's one of those, cliched clips that I would play whenever I needed something as a sermon illustration. Yeah. It's just a perfect visual metaphor for light driving out darkness. I mean, I don't think there's anything that can top that, Brad. It might be my favorite moment in any of these 3 films.
It by far is. And it makes me think about the big fight scene in Matrix Reloaded, where, it's Agent Smith, multiplying himself and he's fighting Neo. And I'm like, oh yeah, that was kind of cool. Or I could watch the Battle of Helm's Deep, which is finished off with this amazing scene of Éomer and Gandalf and the Rohirrim riding down. It's just, there's nothing that can compare.
No. Yeah, and Brad, before we leave this thread, I want to talk about King Theoden a little bit, because I'm conflicted on him too. Because for a while there, I was really blown away by how much the script kind of slowed down and paused and let his grief really resonate with the audience. So part of his story is that while he was under possession by the wizard Saruman, his son dies. And when he's finally released of that possession and comes back to his senses, he finds out that his son is dead. And there's this really beautiful, moving scene where he grieves at his child's graveside and talks about how no parent should have to bury their child.
Alas, that these evil days should be mine. The young perish and the old linger. That I should live to see the last days of my house.
Cedric's death was not of your making.
No parent should have to bury their child.
It's this really beautiful moment that helps you sympathize with what Theoden has gone through. And then I feel like they kind of flip a switch halfway through the movie with him where they need him to be kind of a weasel and kind of sniveling and weak. And it just seems like his whole characterization goes from being really nuanced to really black and white. And even to the very end of the movie, he's telling Aragorn to go do brave stuff, but then boarding up his own door so he doesn't get hurt. And I can't quite get a grasp on what Theoden's supposed to be like in this movie. He's a good king, he's a bad king, he's brave, he's weak. And it really just feels like kind of cheap way for them to contrast Aragorn, who is the chosen king of Gondor, and how he is made for this and Theoden isn't. And I feel like they really just kind of did him a disservice to make their point.
I see what you're saying, and I totally agree with you. I think that for me, what it illustrates is the lingering effects of the poison of Wormtongue, and that Theoden for years and years has been, kind of stuck under the thumb of Saruman, and he's had this poisonous whisperings in his ears. And so it's just kind of that effect that hasn't gone away fully yet, that he's still a little bit afraid. He's still worried to do anything wrong. And if anything, that would be amplified. He's been freed from this, evil power over him. And so there has to be this continued and amplified sense of man, I've already screwed up so much. I'm afraid to screw things up even more. And so for me, that's kind of the lens I've always used as I've viewed Theoden in this movie and Return of the King. Because I agree with you. He kind of flops back and forth. Now, the question would be, is that the script trying to force something, or is it the script trying to illustrate a troubled mind?
Yeah.
You know,
I think that's fair.
And I think that your take is very, very valid. But that's kind of how I would see it.
And I think,
from my point of view.
I do want to say, though, like, this is not a perfect script. You know what I mean? Like, they're dealing with so much that sometimes...
No, that's Back to the Future.
Sometimes things get oversimplified. Like, one of the first notes I took was that, like, the really early dialogue in this movie is kind of really bad. Like, when Frodo and Sam are first introduced to us, or reintroduced to us, they're just, like, staring at Mordor, and Sam's like, Mordor, the place we are trying to go. And I'm like, hey, audience, do you remember that this is the quest? There is Mordor. We are going there. We're all on the same page now, okay? And I was like, okay, I see what you're trying to do here, but it was a very, I don't know, not eloquent way of getting that point across.
No, I totally agree. I think that if the script suffers in any areas, it seems to be a little more often on the Frodo-Sam storyline.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd kind of like to jump into that thread of this saga.
Yeah.
And talk about how do you feel about that half of the movie? Because in the end, I think that Gollum and Andy Serkis's portrayal of him gets a lot of the focus.
Yeah.
But for me this time through, I was just really impressed with both Elijah Wood and Sean Astin, because I think that they give a lot of heart despite some of the script not being great for them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And if it's okay with you, let's just kind of push off Gollum until later in the show, just if we have time, because you're right. Like, more ink has been spilled and minutes have been recorded on podcasts talking about that character than anybody else. So let's focus on Frodo and Sam. And you're right, Brad. They're both doing, like, they're on their A game in this movie, especially towards the end. And one of the things I love about The Lord of the Rings is it never shies away from showing you the emotional toll of what everyone is going through. Everyone's tired. Everyone's exhausted. Everyone is upset, and Frodo's getting paranoid, and Sam is feeling the weight of that. And you see these two men crying around each other all the time. I just think that they do such a spectacular job in this movie and in the next movie of demonstrating that emotional toll. And I think that you're right, though, that sometimes the script, instead of leaning more heavily into the emotional toll, which it should do, it kind of gets bogged down. Like, the scene where they're walking through the marshes is maybe the most unnecessary scene in, like, the whole movie, because it's just another one of those little flourishes that sometimes they do in these Lord of the Rings movies, where sometimes they just make Frodo behave weird for the sake of behaving weird, so that they can say, like, oh, it's the ring, it's making him do weird stuff again. And I wish there was less of that and more of Frodo actually conveying to us or telling us, like, this is what the ring's doing to me. And by the time you get to that at the end of the movie and you get Sam's beautiful speech, that's where the heart and soul of that story is. And I wish they did more of that and less of the kind of, like, contrived, weird behavior stuff.
Yeah, and I think that is the one truly, like, big weak points in the entire trilogy, is the fact that the allure and pull of the ring and the way that it shapes and changes its bearers is just better suited to written text. It's just really hard to translate over into film. And I think that Peter Jackson does a really good job. I think that Howard Shore is the main reason we understand that. You know, like, we see the weight of the ring on Frodo because of the way we feel when we listen to the music, right? That you get this slowing down of the entire world, that it draws attention to Frodo's face and his movement. And so I think that the music really helps, but you are right in saying, like, Gollum just says, like, hey, stay away from the lights. And then Frodo's like, I'm gonna vomit, and then I fall into the water. Like, this is an area where I go, I'm not a director, I'm not a filmmaker, I am such a novice at this, I really shouldn't say anything about it, but I will say this, because I'm arrogant.
But I'm going to anyway, because it's my podcast, damn it.
You could have figured something out.
Yeah, agreed.
Like, I feel like there could have been a better way, and that really hit me hard at the end of the movie when they're in Osgiliath and the Ringwraith is there, And Frodo just kind of is like, I'm going to walk out there now.
Yeah, and they never explain
I'm here. Yeah, and it's
what's he doing? Is he trying to kill, like, is he actually trying to give himself over? Is he just trying to, like, show off, like, I've got the ring? They never really get to his motivations there. And that's the kind of frustrating thing that you're referring to, I think.
Yeah, and I think that Frodo is at his best, and I say Frodo specifically, not Elijah Wood. I think Frodo as a character is at his best in these movies when he is interacting with Sam and Gollum. And even in the first movie, when he's interacting with Boromir, when Boromir tries to take the ring, when he's interacting with Aragorn right after Boromir tried to take the ring, like those interpersonal relationships are where Frodo as a character shines. I think where he struggles as a character is in the movies when he's not interacting with anyone else and they just show him kind of looking dour-faced at the ring or falling into the water or climbing onto the bridge to be taken by the Nazgul. I think that's where he struggles. And that's no mark on Elijah Wood. I think Elijah Wood is so daggone good. The more I watch these movies, the more he stands out to me as one of my favorite actors in these films.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Brad, we're running a little long on the front end here. Give me like 30 seconds on the last thread, the Merry Pippin Treebeard thread of things. Because, like, let's be honest, that's the least weighty of the three threads. It has the least kind of amount of impact. It does build to a really great conclusion, but, like, there's not as much to talk about there.
Sorry, I keep calling him Fangorn because they call him that in the books. Treebeard. He has such great lines in this movie. Like from the line when he goes, "We have decided that you are not orcs."
Yeah.
And then they're just like, wait, what? Like it's stuff like that I love about Treebeard. But the most, I think my favorite part of his performance, which he is performed by John Rhys Davies, who also plays Gimli. I love the moment. It's one of the most emotionally heart-wrenching moments of the entire trilogy when he stands at the edge of Fangorn and he looks around and just says, "Some of these trees were my friends."
Yes.
Like, I literally have the chills right now thinking about that scene. Then he roars out with this great anger.
The best part of that, though, too, is like, you know, I don't know how else to phrase this, Brad. So, like, Patreon listeners, you're going to get an earful here. But, like, once in a while, when a movie gets you so on board with, like, retaliation or what someone's going to do, and you just have this feeling of, like, yes, like, get back at those guys. When he says, "We're going to war, it's likely that we go to our doom. Last march of the Ents." And then that Howard Shore, I'm like, literally, my reaction is just, yes, like go kill that dude. Like the funny thing is too, you're in the middle of watching this other battle, and for a hot second, I'm more on board with Treebeard's motivation for why he wants to fight than I am with the other battle. And I think that's the great triumph of the filmmaking in terms of that story, because like I said, overall, I think this thread has the least going on for it, and yet it builds to such a powerful emotional climax that you're like just as invested in what happens at the outcome of that one as you are the other two.
Yeah, and I think that's where Jackson succeeds as a director the most, is that he distills this massive 6-part book series, and he distills it down to its emotional core. What really matters is the fact that Treebeard's friends have been killed. What really matters is that Éowyn is desperate for recognition. What really matters is that Sam has this blind loyalty to Frodo that will carry him through to the end. Like all of these different emotional cores that make up the story of Lord of the Rings, Jackson captures those beautifully. He does better with some than others, but overall, he grabs all of those threads, he puts them in front of you as a viewer, and he says, "Hey, like this is why you care about the world of Lord of the Rings." And I'll say it again, if he didn't have Howard Shore composing these films, I don't know if the movies would have been a quarter as good as they are.
No, they wouldn't. And that's another thing we can talk about when we get back from the break, Brad. But you can tell we love this movie because we've run like way over on the front half of this episode. We're still getting into the groove. It's episode 1 of season 4. We're feeling loosey-goosey. We're feeling good. Brad, what do you say we hit pause here and let's try this lineup of Penelope Bourbon? What do you say?
I am so pumped for it. Let's get to it.
All right, so today we are taking a departure from what we typically do on these episodes. Usually what we like to do with our regular Monday episodes is talk about a product that you can find at pretty much any liquor store in America. But today we wanted to do something kind of special because it's a special company that we're talking about, Brad. We are going to be walking through 4 different samples from our friends at Penelope Bourbon.
Yeah, Bob, Penelope Bourbon is a phenomenal company that we partnered with back in season 2, maybe?
No, it was like one of our very first, way back in season 1.
Okay, so we've been with them from the start. And by that, I mean, they've been with us from the start.
They've been giving us charity.
Yeah, and you know what? They, at the point when we contacted them, we probably had 5 Instagram followers.
Yeah, honestly, Brad, we had just started. And I reached out and just said, hey, we'd love to try your stuff on the show. We had 150 followers tops. And I actually was talking with the CEO of Penelope the other day, Mike Palladini, and he said, the team brought your request to us, and a lot of people were like, I don't really know if we should throw these guys anything, maybe a couple ounce samples. And he said, no, we are just starting out as a company. Pretty much anybody who asks, we're going to give them a couple bottles. And they sent us 2 full bottles. I remember, 750 ml bottles of their regular 80 proof and their barrel strength, which were both batch 1 at that time. And they've invested in us from the beginning. And it means so much to us when a company doesn't just look at how many followers we have on social media and, decides to invest in what we're doing here. And I like to honor that,
Yeah. Speaking of which, if you want to follow us, go check us out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter,
Right.
at Film Whiskey.
Yeah.
But secondarily, Penelope Bourbon is just a high-class company that puts out some damn good whiskey.
Yeah.
So if they are distributing in their state, I think they're in New York, Wisconsin, California. They're in a few places across the country, but they're also shipping online. I would highly recommend you get the heck out there and try some of their whiskey because it is really good.
Now, just as a little bit of background, Penelope is what we call an NDP, or a non-distilling producer. That means that they source all of their whiskey. It's not even blended in-house. But Mike Palladini, the CEO, and a couple trusted people from that company, they source all their whiskey from MGP. And what they're really known for is their blending process, because they use at least 3 different mash bills in the blending of each one of their whiskeys. What they ultimately come out with is a 4-grain mash bill recipe. And so what you've got here is corn, wheat, rye, and malted barley in all of the ones that we're going to be trying today. If you want to see the exact specs, go to their website. One of the things I love about them is that they're so emblematic of this new movement in whiskey, which is just complete transparency. They tell you, we don't make it here, we get it from MGP. We don't blend it here, we blend it at Castle and Key in Kentucky. Here's the mash bill that we figured out by doing the math of blending all these different kinds of whiskey together. I love that about them, Brad, and it's great to know exactly what I'm getting in the glass here.
Yeah, there is kind of a sense of, whiskey used to be, I don't know, it was like the old boys club. We have our recipe and you have your recipe and it's under lock and key and nobody's ever going to know it. And it was this fiercely guarded secret. And I think that served the industry for a long, long time. But Bob, like you said, this new wave of whiskey distillers are embracing that transparency to say, hey, this is what we are giving you. We hope you like it.
Yeah.
And there's a humbleness in that I really love and appreciate.
Well, today, Brad, we are trying, like I said, 4 different kinds of whiskey from them. We're going to be sampling just their regular 80 proof 4-grain Penelope Bourbon. We're going to be trying a 94 proof rosé-finished bourbon. We're also going to be trying one of their private select barrels, which comes in at 111 proof. And then finally, their barrel strength, that was my favorite from when we tried it back in season 1. That we're now up to batch number 5 that they've just released. This one clocks in at 116 proof. So, Brad, I think what we should do is just kind of move from lowest proof point up to highest. So what do you say we start with this 4-grain, 80-proof Penelope Bourbon?
No, I think we should start with the barrel proof, man.
Let's just singe our tongues and go
for the
down
big
the ladder.
guns.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bob, I'm nosing their standard production 80 proof bourbon, and I will say it's a little bit underwhelming on the nose. I'm getting a little bit of sweet corn kind of coming through. It's decently grainy, and there's like a little bit of a light oaky
Wisp
note. Yeah, a wisp that is kind of nice, but I wish there was a little more of it.
You know what, Brad? The funny thing, too, is I think we were just talking about the glassware that we both like to use now, and I have kind of gone all in on Glencairns at this point. I know that you don't typically like to nose out of a Glencairn, but with this one, for me, I think I'm getting different notes than you are, because I am using the Glencairn, and I think this is a really fruity whiskey. That's kind of the first word that comes to mind. For me, there's a lot of like tangerine, or even like those little, what do you call those, clementines? Like it has that really potent kind of mandarin smell to it. As well as some cherry, and not like dark cherry. What's the other kind with the like the lighter colored Rainier cherries? It smells like those two fruits put together for me. Really, really pleasant. And then there's like a little bit of a grassy note under that as well. Kind of reminds me, if you remember last season, we did the Belfour whiskey that had that weird, almost like it smells like a weed you cut down in the backyard. There's like a little bit of that kind of underlying this as well.
Well, Bob, I actually am drinking this out of a Glencairn, and I am not getting nearly the notes that you are. So maybe something changed in transit, but I'm sitting here, like I said, it's just a little bit of oak, a little bit of corn. It smells like sweet and refreshing, but not overly impressive.
Yeah.
But I don't know, man. Let's give it a sip. See what happens.
Brad, for me on the taste, this one's a little bit almost like saline forward. And I know that it doesn't have a ton of barley in it, so it can't just be that it's, scotchy or anything like that. But it reminds me a lot of that Belfour rye and Belfour bourbon that we had last season. That really strong, plant-like, almost piney kind of taste. Like this just has a pine taste to it. A little bit of like a cola on the very finish of it. Overall, this stays pretty light, pretty watery. I don't mind it, Brad, but I wasn't expecting so much of that kind of herbal character to it after how fruity the nose was.
Yeah, I'm going to use a word that might sound like a pejorative, but like overall, the finish gets a little bit smoky on the end, and I like that. But overall, the flavor profile, the nose, the finish, it's kind of blandly refreshing. Like there's not anything powerful going on. It's refreshing. I actually really enjoy it as a whiskey. But there's just not a ton of flavor happening for me. And that's kind of where I think it misses out a little bit.
And I think that's mostly just owing to the fact that it's an 80 proof whiskey. You know what I mean? Like we've gotten so used to drinking barrel strength stuff now that I think 80 proof is just kind of underwhelming to us at some points. So I don't think that this is a bad whiskey at all. If I had to score it out, I'd probably give it, Brad, I'd say about a 30, 31 out of 50. Where would you be falling on this?
I think I'm in the same boat. I might have come off a little worse than you, but I think probably anywhere from like a 29 to a 31. It's a solid above average whiskey that I would expect for anybody offering their standard, This is your basic Penelope Bourbon.
I mean, this retails for about $40, which is right in line with another 80 proof whiskey, Basil Hayden's. And just because I strongly dislike Basil Hayden's, I will say if those are your two options on the shelf, this is a no-brainer. I would pick this up every time over Basil Hayden's.
Dude, we got to go back and try either the same Basils or a different one, because that was so early in our whiskey tasting career that I wonder if we'd like it more, but I just remember highly disliking it.
Well, Brad, let's move into this rosé finish. This one really interests me because, we've seen a lot of wine-finished bourbons around, but never a rosé. Rosé is known for being such a light-bodied, easy-to-drink wine that I really do wonder, like, how much wine character can this really be imparting into the whiskey? This one is clocking in at 94 proof. I assume that they're leaving this in the barrel for at least a number of months to finish in the rosé barrel. So I don't know, Brad, do you think it's really going to change things a lot? What are you picking up on the nose?
Bob, as I sit with this nose, the aroma is gorgeous. I mean, this thing it just, I don't know, it just has these beautiful notes of strawberry and grape for me. Like, this is everything that I want to smell out of a wine cask finished whiskey.
Yeah.
And, and I'm not expecting the deep, dark red notes that I would out of something finished in like a barrel of cab. But this rosé, I mean, the beautiful thing about rosé is that it's a red wine that has the grape skins removed a little way into the process. It's not red and white wine mixed together or anything like that. And so you're still getting that red wine quality, but for me, it comes across as almost like a creamy strawberry, and I adore it.
Yeah, the note that I took on this, Brad, was cherries and cream. That was actually the first thing I wrote down. So not quite strawberry. For me, it was more of a darker cherry scent and cream, and then just tons and tons of vanilla following that on the nose. This is a really decadent, really, really sweet nose. I'm excited to get into it, Brad. I'm sure you're sipping it over there. What are you getting on the palate?
Oh man, Bob, this is creamy. It's refreshing. It has those hints of kind of the red fruit, the strawberry, the cherry, and yet it feels like almost a strawberry shortcake for me. Like, this is a delicate yet somehow firm flavor that just sticks on your palate. And as it finishes, it's light and airy and just kind of like floats over your throat. I am just blown away with this whiskey.
Yeah, Brad, it's amazing how close our notes are on this, because I wrote down this tastes like a vanilla cake with cherries. And then towards the back of the taste, it took on an almond character, almost like an almond cake for me. And it was almonds and cherries for me. The only thing that I don't know if it's even really a ding or a knock against it, I don't really get any wine character in this at all. Like, it's not coming across in terms of like a tannic nature, in terms of, like you said, like a grape skin. Like, I'm not getting any of that. It really has just made this incredibly vanilla forward, really, really sweet, really, really decadent. I would call this a dessert bourbon for sure. And I like it a lot, Brad. I'd probably give it somewhere in the range of a 38 out of 50.
Bob, I think I'd be closer to like a 43, 44 out of 50.
Wow.
I am super duper impressed with this. I guess for me, I've had a few different rosés, and this is just emblematic of what a rosé should be. It shouldn't be deep and dark and heavy on the grapes. What you want is that nice, light, airy profile that's going to hit you in all the right places and leave you wanting a little bit more, like any good dessert should. And so I am all about this, and I believe the price on this bottle is $65. And compared to something like a Pfeiffer Pavitt Reserve, which was $120, $130, I think that's a spectacular price for this whiskey.
Yeah.
Honestly, I would buy that on my own right now if I could.
And I will also say the 94 proof is the perfect proof point for this. Like, this, I don't know if I want this at cask strength. Like I said, this is a dessert bourbon. This is something that I want to drink as I'm eating a piece of strawberry shortcake. And it just complements it so well. It doesn't overwhelm me with the alcohol. This is one of those times where I would say 94, 95 proof is the exact perfect point for this.
Yeah, Bob, I'm right there with you. I really just think Penelope has knocked it out of the freaking park with this rosé-finished whiskey.
All right, Brad. Well, the bar has been set pretty high. Let's move into this Penelope Barrel Proof Private Select. Now, this was a blend of bourbons that was selected by the subreddit R Bourbon. It comes in at 111.2 proof. And I have to say right up front, Brad, coming off of that rosé nose and palate, this has a pretty muted nose. It's almost 20 proof points higher than the rosé was, but I feel like I'm really kind of digging in here to even try to get anything on the nose of this one.
Yeah, it feels decently alcohol forward, and even when I kind of puff that out to the side, I don't know, there's just a little hint of oakiness, some corn, it's a little bit grainy. It doesn't really take me on a journey that I usually would expect from a barrel-proof whiskey. I'm not super duper impressed yet.
Yeah, and on the taste, Brad, it's also alcohol forward. I got a bit of a sour taste up front, leading into a note of caramel and then some peanut butter as well. Like, it did open up into those really nice, sweet, classic bourbon flavors. I love it when I get the pairing of peanut butter and caramel. But it just finished really strongly oaky for me. And so, like, I don't know. It went from kind of having not much going on to having your standard bourbon notes going on. But I didn't find it to be the most pleasant experience. I think it's above average for sure, but I'd still probably only give it in the realm of like a 32 out of 50.
Bob, I'm actually in a pretty different place here. The nose was underwhelming for me, and then I got to the taste, to the palate, and I was really solidly surprised by this whiskey. I think that it has a little bit of like a dark, almost like a stone fruit, like a plum feel to it. There's a little bit of spiciness mixed in there. And then you're right. Near the end of the palate and into the finish, there's a beautiful nutty flavor that pairs with the smoky oakiness that I'm really, really impressed with. I've actually kind of come around on this. It was kind of a snooze fest at the start. But by the end, I would say it was warming my soul a little bit.
Oh, wow. Warming the soul. All right, Brad. So we're in different places on that one, but the one that I have been the most excited for is their standard lineup barrel strength. This is batch number 5 of their barrel strength. It is coming in at 116 proof. Brad, when we got these Penelope bottles in season 1, like I went through that barrel strength way faster than I should have. It was just so good, really decadent. And as I nose this one, like the first note that I took down was just, oh yeah, this is right up my alley. This is just like tons of maple. It's not even brown sugar. It's maple, almost like a maple donut frosting and peanut butter. Super decadent, super sweet, like a really unhealthy breakfast.
I'm not there with you, Bob.
Wow.
I feel like I get a little bit of oak, a little bit of corn. There's a little bit of spiciness on the nose, but I'm not getting anything caramel, anything sweet or desserty. It feels to me more like just a standard bourbon nose.
Huh. Man, I almost feel like maybe you mixed up the private select and the regular barrel strength, because it seems like we had completely opposite readings of both of these whiskeys, Brad.
Honestly, both of them came across very similarly to me on the nose. Just standard bourbon-y aromas. Nothing standing out.
All right, well, I think I'm in a different place than you, Brad. And as I sip this, I think that's where it really distinguishes itself from the private select. Really sweet, some really nice spice, kind of a nondescript spice. Like it's not overly alcohol tingly. It's not really peppery. Just it lets you know that there's some alcohol there, but it's not offensive at all. And then it ends on the finish with just a little hint of peach. And I really, really like that, like a summertime peach. There's not a ton of burn going down. I really like that I could drink this as a barrel-proof bourbon and not have too much of a Kentucky hug. I found this to be, Brad, just like eminently drinkable. And I still am in love with Penelope barrel strength. Like it just confirmed that, especially when it comes to this barrel strength, they know what they're doing.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go to my balance note first. This is like a really well-balanced whiskey, and there's nothing like strong to complain about, but it's just kind of missing a little something. It honestly reminds me of their 80 proof offering in the sense that I'm like, I can't really complain about much here, but it's just missing a little bit of flavor. Like for me, it's a little bit grainy on the tongue. It's got a little bit of a syrupy texture that's kind of nice. As I get into the finish, it slightly sours a little bit on the palate, but it has some nice kind of smoky oak notes on the back end. Like overall, like I can tell that this is a high quality barrel proof. Like I can tell that it's well made. But once again, similarly to the 80 proof, it's just missing a little bit of flavor. And the thing is, now that I've had the rosé, I know that they know how to do flavor.
Yeah.
Because, good Lord, they can bring it. And I really think that their private select also had some really surprisingly great flavor after I was a little underwhelmed by the nose. This one, however, is leaving me wanting a little bit more.
I still think that if I had to rank these at the end of the day, I would put the barrel strength and the rosé in a category kind of their own. And then the other two would be below that. Brad, it sounds like the rosé was like far and away the winner for you today.
Yeah, I think I would put the rosé at a pretty high. I mean, it's one of the higher scored whiskeys I think I would have had in the last 4 seasons. I think that the private barrel select is good, solid, impressive offering. And then both their 80 proof and their barrel proof, kind of regular offerings, for me, they're in the same category. Solid further proof point, but nothing overwhelming.
But I also want to make sure that we say out loud here, Brad, we're both really big fans of this non-distilling producer, Penelope Bourbon. Like right before we pressed record, I asked you what you had been thinking about these, and you told me the rosé is one of maybe like 5 or 6 whiskeys that we've ever had on this show that you would feel an urge to go out and buy for yourself.
100%. Yeah. I want to say unequivocally, the rosé is one of the best whiskeys we've had on this show. I mean, it is far and away one of the most unique offerings I've ever had. I don't know if I've ever seen something that captures the fruit essence so beautifully as that rosé wine.
Well, folks, there you have it. There's 4 whiskeys from the Penelope Bourbon lineup. We hope this has been informative. We want to say thank you again to Penelope for sending these along. We absolutely love working with you, and we so appreciate your support over the years. Brad, it's time. What do you say we get back into talking about the Two Towers?
Let's get to it.
All right, so that was Penelope Whiskey. Brad, we are pumped full of 4 different kinds of bourbons now, so that means we are ready to take on the rest of this episode on the Two Towers. And for season 4, we're bringing in a new segment here. If you listen to our bracket challenge episodes, you know that Brad likes to give end of season awards to his movies. And we're going to start doing that with each of our episodes. So Brad, if you had to give this movie an award, the film and whiskey, I don't know, what would you call it? The Filmies.
The Filmies.
What filmy would you give this movie?
Bob, we already kind of mentioned it, but I am going to give The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, the Holy Ghost Award, because there are so many moments that I feel the Holy Spirit moving. And to explain that to our non-Christian listeners, in Christianity, God is awesome and he is living and active. And sometimes you can just feel him moving in your soul. And usually it kind of feels like chills, like goosebumps. And the way you feel when Éomer and Gandalf come over the hill, when Treebeard shouts out in anger and he talks about the last march of the Ents, those are some of the most powerful Holy Spirit moments I've ever had in a movie-going experience. And so it gets the Holy Ghost Award.
I love it, dude. I love too that we're leaning into like the King James. We're not saying Holy Spirit Award. It's the Holy Ghost Award.
It 100% is, man.
Well, on the flip side of that, we're also introducing a new segment where Brad and I can contain our nitpicks to one small area. And we've already failed miserably at that because we pointed out many, many flaws in the first half.
Yep.
But, you know, if Brad gets to give out an award, I get to ruin something. And so we're going to call this segment Bob Ruins It. Now, if you listen to, like, say, our Back to the Future episode, where Brad and I feel like systematically demolished that movie.
Just dismantled piece
we really
by
did.
piece.
I don't think this is really going to be a good example of a Bob Ruins It, Brad, because I love this movie. I think it is nearly flawless. I mean, honestly, the only nitpicks I really have are, like, I do think that the CGI is showing its age, and which really sucks because I think it held up for a long, long time. And now kind of looking at a lot of the Gollum stuff, it's like, oh, okay. Like we've come a long way since then.
Yeah.
I still think Gollum looks great. And I think for the most part, like the translucency of his skin, like everything still looks really good. It's the lighting. You can tell that he's not like in the scene with people, that they kind of messed up some of the, like the moonlight and how it hits them. And there's one particular scene where like you could tell actually that on Frodo and Sam, the light is coming from like the left of the screen, and they actually animated Gollum with the light coming on the right of his face. So it's like completely different sources of light. And it looks like he's just been like cut and pasted in there. We've come a long way in terms of making CGI elements look like more well integrated into the movie. And I think Gollum really stood out in a negative way for me because of that.
Yeah, this was the first time I've watched it. And we've said this many times. Whenever we watch a movie for the podcast, we tend to turn a more critical eye on the film. And for me, I almost didn't want to bring it up during the episode because I was afraid to say it. I agree. The CGI in this movie was a little bit rough. The redeeming thing for me about it, though, is when I think about another movie that we've done for the podcast called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And when I think about the CGI in that film, which came out the same year, and I believe the same season, probably like the end of 2001, the CGI in that film is childish compared to the CGI in this film.
I don't know, man. I think Dobby still holds up pretty well. Like, Dobby, for me, holds up about as well as Gollum holds up.
Yeah, well, I mean, Dobby was in the second movie, so a year or two later.
This came out the same year as Chamber. They both came out in 2002.
Oh, this is yeah. For some reason, I was thinking Fellowship. Yeah, so I guess you're probably right then. I guess for me, I think about other movies at the time, and I do think that this is probably the best CGI you could ask for in 2002.
Oh, absolutely.
But I'm with you, Bob. It definitely has taken a toll. I think Treebeard sometimes does not look very good at all.
Yeah.
The way Merry and Pippin are sitting in his like branches just doesn't always look good. So yeah, there's certain CGI elements that I'm not going to fault the movie on. You know, it was made in 2002. I can't expect 2022 graphics out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, like, to be honest, though, I think that sometimes we've gone like too far the other direction. There's actually a really good YouTube video. If I can think of the name of it, maybe I'll put it in the show notes. But I just remember the thumbnail just says like, is CGI bad now? And it talked all about the CGI in the Hobbit movies. And because they tried so hard to go with that sort of like video game, 60 frames per second, 4K resolution, it actually made the CGI look even more rubbery and unrealistic. You know, Gollum in those movies, I think, takes a dramatic step up in terms of like the level of detail they're able to get on Gollum in the Hobbit movies. But I don't necessarily know that they took the right advice. Like I'm not like complaining about the level of detail or anything. I'm complaining more about like fix the lighting, make it look a little more natural, and I think we'd be fine. And so I think at the end of the day, like solving the problem of CGI mixing with real people is something that we're not really going to hit on for a long time. Like I think even in a couple years, Thanos is probably not going to look that great to us because the advancements are happening so rapidly that we'll go back and watch Infinity War and Endgame and be like, oh, that looks terrible, you know?
Well, and honestly, that brings me to my main point that I have always made about CGI, and my point always includes the Two Towers and the Return of the King. Practical effects just look better.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing, I don't mind the CGI in any of the Lord of the Rings movies when it's like a massive, you know, zoomed out camera shot of these massive armies. Man, that's fine. CGI the heck out of those armies. I can't tell the difference. But when it comes to up close shots, the reason Helm's Deep looks like such a freaking cool battle is because they have actual human beings wearing actual costumes that were painstakingly made.
Yeah.
And they look spectacular. The reason the Rohirrim look so cool is because they're riding actual horses and they look spectacular.
Yeah. Well, and then even like with the Helm's Deep model, like they had, I think, at least two different miniatures. They had a really small miniature that they would kind of do like far away things from. And then they had one that I think was like 1/10 scale that people could actually walk on and things like that. And when they blow up the wall, when the Uruk-hai blow up the wall, I remember there was a whole thing in the special features where they talked about how they really only had one shot to record that. And so they blew up, one of the big miniatures. They called them bigatures. And that's how we get that shot in the movie. And of course they add CGI elements, they add CGI armies and stuff there. But the reason that looks so good and so lived in and so felt and so real is because they were filming real matter in space exploding. Yep. It's not just made in a computer. I think you're right, Brad. The key here is like, if you're going to do it, find a way to incorporate real practical effects with the CGI effects. Don't over rely on just computer generated stuff.
The human brain can tell the difference.
Yeah.
Even if it's not our like conscious level thinking, well, that is computer generated imagery. We still know the difference and we can tell. And I just think that practical effects are so important to do. So I guess this turned into me nitpicking other CGI
Brad
movies.
ruins it. So, but going along that same thread, things that enhance the movie, you've been talking about this like the whole episode. We should talk about Howard Shore's score for these films a little bit. We can't get too in depth because we can't share clips of it on here or we'll get, copyright, cease and desist orders and everything else. But this is the movie for me where you really notice the importance of Howard Shore's scoring take off, even more than in the first one. And the first one had some spectacular music in it. But with this one, he's introducing new themes and new leitmotifs. And, when you go to the nation of Rohan and it has that beautiful kind of like Celtic sound to it. I never forget that theme. When you have that triumphant march of the Ents at the end of the movie, I can only associate it with Merry and Pippin and Treebeard. And he does this great thing where he starts weaving in these themes throughout the trilogy, and it evokes a certain feeling for you. It's a really great example. Brad, I know neither you or I were like music theory majors, but it's a really great example of the idea of the motif or the leitmotif. It is designed to have a specific emotional response. And so when they play it later on in the series, you know exactly what they're trying to tell you and what kind of response they're trying to get out of you.
Well, and for listeners who have no idea what we're talking about, I believe leitmotif is spelled like Leitmotif. I think that's it, right?
Yep.
And essentially, what I know about a leitmotif as a huge novice would be that it's a theme built for a specific character or like action sequence in a movie, and that it can be incorporated into many different parts of the movie. And it might change its form throughout the films as the character changes, but overall, it's almost like a theme for a specific character.
Yeah.
And Shore does an amazing job. He builds this core understanding of the world of Lord of the Rings in the first movie. And then, like you said, Bob, he continues to expand upon it, add layers on it, to where when you meet the nation of Rohan, you feel the music is similar to the first movie, but like you said, he adds different elements to the music. He adds different instruments. He adds kind of a different focus. And so you still feel connected to the rest of the world around you. It's not like a jarring shift into like, well, now we are in a whole new world. Like it keeps you connected to the rest of the films, but it makes each nation, each character, each beat of the story unique enough that it just ties it all together beautifully.
Yeah.
And I love it.
All right, Brad, we love this movie. We've been going on and on about it. I love it when you and I are like clicking at such a deep nerdy level. I hope this was entertaining for people to listen to because like we went hard on some of these proper nouns today. But I think it's time for us to kind of pull back and give it our final scores. And Brad, here's my big worry about scoring this movie. I love this movie more than the other two Lord of the Rings movies. And yet this time around, I feel like I could more easily identify flaws with this one than I could with Fellowship. And I'm like, oh man, if I really wanted to be objective, I think I might give this a 9.5 because like,
yeah,
I think it is probably a more flawed movie, but I just love it. So like, I'm like, man, what do I do?
Yeah, as I was watching it, I thought to myself a similar thing. I was just kind of like, like this is better than Fellowship, like emotionally, but I think that Fellowship is the best of the three movies. As far as just technical, the acting, the script was the tightest, and that includes all the lore dump that the first movie has to be. I think that the first movie is the best one.
Interesting.
I think that when we talk about the three films, it seems to me like the films just got bigger and bigger each time. And I think that the reason the first film feels cleanest to me is that I would imagine that, I think it was almost a year of filming. Everybody was just a little bit more fresh when they were making the first movie. And by the time you get to the second and third film, everything had gotten so spread out and big, and actors were all doing all sorts of different things, and the crew is overextended and tired. I think you can kind of see a little bit of that in the second and third film. But in the end, Bob, I can't help but give this movie a 10 out of 10. The Two Towers is this masterpiece in narrative storytelling. It has climactic action sequences and some beautiful character-driven movement. The relationship between Aragorn and Éowyn is compelling. Merry and Pippin deepen in their maturity, and like Sam's devotion to Frodo just drives home the emotional core of this story. You know, we didn't talk about it much, but I think that Gollum introduces just this fantastic element into the story, and it kind of helps embed the dark pull of the ring on Frodo's soul.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, it offers some like surprising comic relief. I think that the Battle of Helm's Deep is one of the greatest battle sequences ever filmed, and that, you know, like I said, the practical effects used throughout the entire movie, they still look phenomenal, and they took the movie to the next level. You know, if there's the one thing that we notice, it is the CGI, but it was really great for its time, and I'm not going to complain about it too much.
Yeah.
You know, overall, this film, in my opinion, is nearly perfect in every way, and it even manages to keep the runtime under 3 hours, which is still mind-boggling to me. So this is a 10 out of 10, Bob.
Yeah, Brad, I don't know if I would be as hard on this movie if I hadn't seen it like 30 times. You know what I mean? And you're right. We do watch with a more critical eye when we come to talk about it on the podcast. And part of that is because, especially with a movie I love, I feel like I need to have a defense for everything that might be a flaw in this movie. I just keep coming back to this idea that there are more obvious flaws with this one in terms of the structure, in terms of the writing, than there were with the first movie. And yet I think overall, like you said, this movie is a better film because of its emotional core and the way they tap into it better. And we haven't even talked about this. I love the cliffhanger at the end. It's a perfect use of that second installment in a trilogy cliffhanger that you need. Brad, I'll give it a 10 out of 10. Like, we don't give 0.75s around here. I might be inclined to give a 9.75, but if it's between a 95 and a 100 or a 9.5 and a 10, I'm going to give this movie a 10. And that means that both of us have awarded this film our highest score on Film and Whiskey. But we want to know what you think. So please, get on social media. Let us know what you think of The Two Towers compared to Fellowship, compared to Return of the King. Is it as good as those movies are? Is it even better? You can find us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Film Whiskey.
Or you can give us a call. Leave a voicemail letting us hear your opinion on The Two Towers, on the entire trilogy. You can call us on our Anchor.fm website, which is anchor.fm/filmwhiskey.
Next week, we'll be back talking about the 1992 baseball classic, A League of Their Own. Until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.